Joining me now is Liberal MP and former ADF Commando Keith Wallahan. Keith, seems pretty clear why the government would want to do this because, of course, ASPI has been outspoken about the threat of China. Albanese has been cozying up to China. You'd have to think they're like, oh, well, we cannot possibly have anyone speaking out against what's really going on here.
Caleb, I'm coming to you from outside of school. It's school graduation season, so I haven't checked for sprinklers, but if they go off, I apologise in advance. I know it's a work hazard these days.
Well, they make good television anyway. I'm sure there are plenty of viewers who wouldn't mind a politician getting sprayed.
That's right, that's right. So if I get some, it was the students doing it. This is a really, really important thing that has happened. We are seeing a crucial think tank that has been critical of both sides of politics on defence. And as a former ADF member, I know that the Department of Defence or the Department of Foreign Affairs doesn't get it right all the time. So to have that outside voice is important. And to have a member of the bureaucracy sit on the board, it's not that there will necessarily be a hardcore influence, it's the soft influence. It's knowing that that person is sitting there and knowing that your funding has to be reviewed every 5 years. You know that's going to compromise their independence. And it's not just actual compromise, but the apprehension of compromise in the same way that we look at the apprehension of bias. So this is really concerning, and I do call on the government to reconsider their position, and the coalition certainly will be reviewing this.
Well, there's no other reason to do it than if you want to influence the outcomes of the think tank, right?
Well, we've seen the reports, online, all of the leaks saying that the government members are unhappy with the positions taken by ASPI, and unhappy because of the criticisms of their decisions, of their actions and of their inaction. And a government to respond to that in this way is really authoritarian, and it's disturbing. So the government calls on us as a coalition to defer to the experts, whether it's the CSIRO or AEMO, but it seems like they're quite selective when they ask for independent advice to be given. And I just imagine this. Imagine the coalition was calling for the CSIRO funding to be reviewed every 5 years. There's no way that would be tolerated, and we wouldn't put that to the people.
I'm not suggesting that this is why it's happened, as in, the CCP's picked up the phone to Albo and said, get rid of ASPI. But how much do you think the link between the Albanese government and China, and they've made a great effort during their time in government to suck up to China, how much of that do you think plays into this decision?
Well, both sides of politics value the trade that we have with China. It's our largest trading partner, but it's important that we are clear-eyed about that. And what concerns me is that the 14 demands that were made years ago, this was one of them. So that should cause the government to pause, because it does look like capitulation to those 14 demands. And those 14 demands were unreasonable and they didn't work. And I would have hoped that is something that both sides of politics recognise. We don't want to set a precedent where similar demands are made in the future. So because it was in that list, that is an extra reason why this should not occur.
Now, Keith, Penny Wong has spoken about the reports of her fiery phone call with the Israeli foreign minister. This is what she had to say about it.
Australia, alongside the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, Japan and many other countries, have been calling for a ceasefire, for the release of hostages and for the provision of aid into Gaza. That is the position we have been articulating, and that's the position that I reflected to the Israeli foreign minister.
Seems like she's playing down that phone call. Of course, the reports we've heard out of Israel about how it went are slightly different.
Well, it is, and this is the problem with our relationship with Israel now. It has never been lower, and the reason it has never been lower is because Israel needs friends more than any other time in their history. And what we know when you're standing up to bullies, and they've got bullies at their neighbours, is you have to be strong. And what the government is calling for is a time of weakness, when it is the last thing that should be done. So, of course, we want to see the hostages returned. We want to see the war ended. We want to see civilian casualties ended. But in order to do that, the war has to end in a way that it won't start again. So what Israel is doing against Hezbollah, what it's doing against Hamas, and what it is doing against the other bad faith actors in the region should be supported. So to undermine them in key votes at the UN at this time when the war is still on, is really undermining our relationship with a key partner.
I'll talk about this later in the show because it involves Donald Trump and, of course, his threat to basically wreak havoc if there is not a release of the hostages by the time he becomes president. But there is talk now that there could well be a ceasefire by the end of the year, and that Hamas is more and more moving towards getting on board with something like that. But it comes with no thanks or dues for Penny Wong or any other people like her. I mean, they've been running around saying, oh, we need a ceasefire, we need a ceasefire, we need a ceasefire. But by that, they've essentially meant that Israel should put down their guns and then, I don't know, let Hamas run riot. They've not actually shown any leadership that would lead to the ceasefire that they supposedly want.
Well, if you're in a position like Penny Wong is, you should be a student of history. And this isn't the first conflict to ravage the earth. And we know that these conflicts end in a negotiation, and those negotiations end from a position of strength. They never end in a position of weakness. Positions of weakness prolong the conflicts. So whatever well-intended outcomes the government has to force Israel to show a weak hand is to prolong this war. And surely they must know that.
Keith Wallahan, thank you so much for your time.